Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is a video I've been looking forward to making. So, I'm a trans man, and I've been living as a man for a few years now, and I am exceptionally happy in my transition. It's basically all I talk about on this channel. But my questioning phase was very long and very hard for me. And as part of my questioning phase, I watched a lot of videos that are titled like this one. How do you know if you're trans? Am I trans? Yada yada. And basically none of them spoke to me. They all had like three themes, so it was either look for childhood signs, look for experiences of dysphoria where you're uncomfortable with your gender, or if you're questioning whether you're trans, that probably means you are trans. And there's a reason that these three narratives are so popular. They work for a lot of people, and they might work for you. If you're watching this video and one of these narratives really rings true to your experience, that's good, that's fine, that's awesome. But they didn't work for me. And so I was left pretty uncomforted by a lot of these videos, and still pretty worried and anxious about my transition. In the end, I found a different approach that worked for me, and a different way to feel confident and excited going into my transition. And so that's what I'm going to present to you today. So this is for if you're one of those people that's already watched like 5 of those videos and not felt like any of them have worked. Maybe sort of my narrative and my approach around my transness might resonate with you. So why didn't those 3 narratives work for me? I have childhood signs that I was trans, sure. Lots of instances of me wanting to play house and being the husband or being the boy, all those things. And at first I did lean a little into those, but I talked with my parents and they had instances of gender nonconformity too in their childhood. My mom was a pretty big tomboy, and I think she said that at times she wanted to be a boy. My dad wore dresses as a little kid. And there's a reality that, like, I didn't want to center my adult choice to transition on what I was like when I was 6 years old. I was a weirdo when I was 6. So many things have changed, and the things I did at that age don't need to determine what I'm like now. I also have experienced dysphoria, and there were times when I leaned a little into that narrative too, but it didn't make me feel good. Dysphoria told me that I wouldn't be a man and that I looked very, like, feminine and womanly. When I tried to identify my transness on that, it just made me feel really bad. I felt very unconfident in my choice to transition, because dysphoria told me my transition would fail. And so it never made me feel good to think about it. And I think the line between dysphoria and dysmorphia is kind of murky for some of us. Some of the thoughts I had were really real, like, I did have a female chest, and it did feel good to not have it anymore. But there were other things that aren't that real. My hips aren't that womanly. I know plenty of cis guys with hips like mine. And the dysphoria there was a little dysphoria, but also dysmorphia, and I just didn't like identifying my choice to transition on stuff that just never made me feel good, never made me feel happy. And then lastly, like, I am someone who questions. I question everything. I think smart people question, and anxious people question, and smart and anxious people really question all the time. And so I absolutely don't believe that I'm trans just because I questioned whether I was trans. People can question anything. There are people who are cis who have questioned their gender. Gender is one of the most important parts of how we experience society. So I almost think it's crazy that people don't question it. Gender sort of underpins basically every social interaction we have, and so don't you wonder a little whether you're in the best one for you? It's not weird to wonder, and doesn't mean you're trans that you've wondered it. Okay, so those 3 narratives didn't speak to me, didn't make me feel comfortable. Well, what did? Well, I believe that I'm trans because I grew up as a girl, and I'm now happy living as a man. For me, the narrative of transness that spoke the truest to me was that it's a lived experience. If being trans makes you happy, if transitioning makes you feel good, and makes you feel authentic and comfortable, then you're trans. And that can be a mix of a lot of different factors, right? It can encompass sort of all the other sort of sub-narratives. You can feel good living as a man or living as a woman, whatever your desired gender to transition to is, because dysphoria went away and you felt better, because comfort and euphoria came and you felt good, because of the feelings of authenticity, because of excitement about your future. It can be all these things together. I think of transition as not too different from any other major life choice. When you're going into deciding whether to buy a home or what school to go to for college, people don't ask you to narrowly focus on childhood signs or on discomfort and dysphoria, or to sort of make it out to be predestined, right? I went to the college I did because I researched a bunch of options and I thought that ultimately that college I chose would make me the most happy. A transition doesn't need to be any different. Again, it can be. If other things resonate with you more, that's fine. But it doesn't need to be. It can be like any other major choice. And I don't think there's anything wrong with taking agency in your decision to transition, and to owning the fact that you might be making a huge choice that might pay off amazingly. There's nothing wrong with making a choice. And I think that the reason that a lot of trans narratives try to claim that transition isn't a choice is because of transphobia, right? Like, we have to argue that we would literally die if we don't transition. But many of us wouldn't have literally died if we didn't transition. I wouldn't have. My life would have just been worse. And so if we free up, like, transphobia and can distance ourselves a little bit from the narratives that were necessary to establishing medical care for trans people, we have the option to say that transition just can improve quality of life. Okay, so that gets to the heart of the problem though, right? How do you know if transition is going to improve your quality of life if you haven't done it yet? I now feel so confident in my identity as a trans man because being a man is making me happy. But before I transitioned, even when I sort of identified as a trans man and aspirationally wanted to be a man, I wasn't really living as one in society, and so I didn't feel very confident. So, again, it's kind of like any other big life choice. When you decide to have kids, you don't know how that's going to pan out. When you decide to get married, you don't know how it's going to pan out. We make choices under uncertainty all the time. So, in this video, which has had a pretty big intro, I'll admit it, I am not going to be able to promise you that by the end of the video, you will confidently know one way or another whether transition is going to work for you. If this narrative resonates with you, that's just the reality of the matter, right? We don't know if a big decision is going to work out well until we've done it. But I can hopefully set you up on what honestly might be a multi-month journey of introspection and reflection that hopefully will make you feel more confident in the choice you are considering making. So I've linked in the comments of this video a Google Doc that has a set of steps that are things that I use and things that I would recommend using if you are thinking about questioning. So I'm now gonna walk you through how I would go about questioning your gender if what works for you is thinking about it like a big life choice. So, step 0 is to buy a journal. And I know, it seems corny, I know, but really, it's very important. I kept a journal when I was questioning my gender, and it was super useful to read back through what I'd written, and it was also useful to set time aside deliberately to reflect and think about my relationship to my gender at the end of often many days in a week. And so the steps that I'm going to go through now all involve, in some component, journaling about your feelings. So you will really need a journal if you're going to try to follow this approach to thinking about whether transition will work for you. Okay, so step 1 is to think about big life choices that you've already made. Think about a choice that you've made that worked out really well. What was going on in your mind when you made that choice? What made you confident in the choice leading up to it? And now think about a choice that didn't work out well. Maybe a choice that you regret. Similarly, what factors were going on in your life when you made that choice? And why did you originally think it was going to work out going into it? So you're going to literally want to journal and reflect on this. And again, it might take days and weeks thinking about this, but I can give you my answers to maybe help you out a little. So a choice that I'm very, very happy with is my career. I love being an economist, and it was a pretty big choice. I had to choose my college major, I had to decide not to do other opportunities, I had to spend a lot of time applying to this program, spend a lot of money. What made me feel confident that this was the right choice is actually doing pretty poorly in a class. So for me, I'm someone that's been somewhat externally motivated. I want people to like me, I want people to think I'm smart, and that has influenced things I've done in the past. I did a lot of math growing up, not necessarily because I liked it, but because I was really good at it. And when I stopped being good at math, I realized the joy I felt from doing it went away. And that was a sad revelation. And so with economics, when I did poorly in a class and was still really excited, I realized that the joy I felt from it was internal. And that made me feel confident that the contentedness I would feel from this career choice would be stable, because I go through ups and downs all the time professionally. I have failures and successes, and if my mood was changing all the time with that, it would be really hard. A choice that I'm not happy I made is my freshman year of college. I entered a pretty serious relationship, I think way too quickly, and it went on way too long. And it pretty materially affected my college experience. It's something I don't think back on fondly. What was going on in my head when I made that choice? I really wanted to be normal. I remember literally thinking, and I even wrote it in a poem, that I couldn't believe that a guy who liked sports and who drank beer would want to date me. I wasn't dating him for him, I was dating him for what it meant about me that I was dating him. And so that's a kind of factor that I think led me to make a bad choice. So you can think about that for yourself, right? And you don't need to immediately relate it to gender. Just mull over it, right? Think about how you make big decisions. Think about what makes it easy for you to make a choice and what things lead you towards good choices. So that's step one. Step two is to find examples of people living happy, authentic lives of a myriad of gender presentations. So transition is a particularly hard choice to think about because society really stigmatizes us and from sort of all angles. To talk about my own experience, when I was going into questioning my gender, at that point I knew the choice wasn't to be a super feminine cis woman or to be a very masculine trans man. I knew that I was either going to be a gender non-conforming woman, non-binary kind of thing, or I was going to be a trans guy and I wasn't really sure how masculine I was going to look. And sort of either way, there's a lot of stigma, right? There's stigma to be gender non-conforming, there's stigma to be trans, and it's hard to parse all that out. And so I'd recommend actively taking control of this, right? And deliberately exposing yourself to what it looks like to be happy for a variety of your options on either side. And this isn't wasted time, right? I am not a gender nonconforming woman, but the time I spent consuming media that portrayed gender nonconforming women in a positive light influences me to this day as a man. So this can look like making real-life friends of a variety of different gender experiences, and it can also look like hunting down movies, TV shows, and books that talk about different experiences. So again, this is something I would journal about. Literally write down, like, did you do your homework assignment? Did you find a movie that had a trans guy in it? Did you read a book about what it's like to be a gender nonconforming lesbian? Did you do these different things? You can choose who you follow on social media. Like, these are all choices that sort of slowly influence the biases that we have underneath us. And I think it's important to kind of let the biases passively flow away. And so, yes, you can also talk about, do you relate to different experiences? So there are aspects, when I hear people talk about their experiences as butch lesbians, that I relate to, even though I'm not one. There are also aspects that I don't relate to from certain trans men. So it's not that, you're just sort of picking what experience do you most relate to, but there's a lot you can learn from thinking about what things resonate with you and what don't. So step 3 is try it out a little, right? So the hard thing, again, is that the biggest things towards taking the step towards living as a man or a woman or whatever your, again, desired transitional gender might be, is that these big steps are often very serious and sometimes irreversible and things that you might want to feel very confident going into them. But you can make reversible changes, and you can see how you feel. So try some reversible changes. And these are things where you can find YouTube videos, you can find Reddit threads about how you can try out different aspects of what it might be like to live as a different gender. In my case, I remember cutting my hair, buying new clothing, buying a binder, and just seeing how it felt. You don't need to see how it felt just immediately, right? Like, I remember putting on my binder, and I had seen examples of trans guys getting their first binder and crying, and I put mine on and I was like, this is tight. That was my first thought. It's not all about the first thought. It's not just about that instantaneous euphoria, because transitioning is about long-term lived experiences. It's not about fleeting moments of joy. So try things and see how you feel over the long run, right? You got your first haircut and maybe it made you feel anxious, maybe it made you feel excited. Well, how do you feel 6 months later? How do you feel when you've really lived with someone with short hair, as long hair, when you've made that change? Try a bunch of things and sit with it. Remove some of the pressure, I guess, to instantaneously know how you feel about anything. It makes sense that it takes some time to simmer and to reflect on the different changes you've made. So, step 4 is to find friends or relatives or therapists that you can talk with about the different feelings you're going through right now. So this is ideally someone that you can talk with about doubts and worries, and that you can kind of be fluid with, right? In my case, I was very selective with who I told that I was questioning my gender. I tried out different pronouns with a small group of people before I ultimately socially transitioned. because I was, I think, rightfully scared that if I just announced to everyone that I was going by a new set of pronouns, I wouldn't get the time to personally reflect on how I felt about it. And so instead thinking about people, which I think at the time was my partner, a relative, and a close friend, so having a very small group of people that I tried this out with made me feel more confident that I could tell them that, like, it felt new still and it felt scary. That I could talk about my doubts with these people and know that they wouldn't judge me if I decided ultimately I didn't want to transition, or they wouldn't judge me if I transitioned in spite of having had doubts. So find these people that you think will be supportive about the ups and downs of questioning. Step 5. So you're making a big choice, and part of the way that you can feel comfortable in your choice is by being good at making large decisions and being comfortable thinking about your future. So you can practice this skill. So you can practice reflecting on what you want your future to be and setting goals for yourself. What do you want your life to look like next year, in 5 years, in 20 years? You can take time and think about these things and journal about them. What are goals you have? What are fears you have? What kinds of people do you want to meet? What kinds of things do you want to do for fun? Where do you want to live? What do you think your career might be? When I had a pretty stable view going forward of what my life would look like outside of my gender, it made it easier for me to see how my gender would fit into it. If you're someone where you have a hard time envisioning what your next year might look like, of course you might have a hard time thinking about what it would be like to be a different gender. These are both similar sorts of skills. So for step 6, I would recommend reflecting on what kinds of social media make you feel good as you're questioning. So this is in line with one of the general themes that I have here, which is that if you are someone who's questioning your gender, you have to think about what works for you. What sort of narratives around transness resonate with you? What sorts of ways of reflecting and questioning work for you? We are all trying to just assemble the different experiences we have in our lives into some sort of narrative, and what that looks like for each of us looks different. And so similarly, the social media that works for your friend might not work for you. I remember realizing that Twitter just never made me feel good. Trans Twitter felt very reactionary, and it just didn't resonate with me. I'm a slow-thinking, very sort of philosophical kind of person, if you've watched any of my videos, and maybe from this video you can get that, right? And so I didn't like Twitter. I didn't relate to those people. And maybe you relate to those people, and that's great. But you have to think about, like, really what works for you. You also have to think about what sorts of content and platforms are sucking you out of your real life. My real life as a trans person is not YouTube. I love making YouTube videos, and I always actually kind of had to push myself to make videos because I'm out and about, I'm doing everything, right? I'm getting meals with friends, I am going out to clubs, I am working on my research, I am cleaning my room, I'm doing all sorts of real person things. The reason I'm a man is because of my real life. It's not really because of trans YouTube. And so you want to make sure that the content and the platforms that you're on are supplementing and augmenting your real life rather than detracting from it and taking you out of reality, right? Because it is the happiness that you'll feel from your day-to-day interactions in the real world that will determine whether you're going to be a happy trans person. Step 7. So this is a step that might be the most useful or most appropriate months into this process. And that's to take a step back and reflect on what experiences in questioning and trying out different things with your gender have worked the best for you. So ask yourself, and again, journal about it, when have you felt the most confident about wanting to transition? When have you felt the least confident? And when have you felt the most comfortable in your current sort of gender, the way society perceives you? When have you felt the least comfortable? When have you felt the most comfortable thinking about yourself as the gender you're planning on transitioning to? And when have you felt the least comfortable? And again, I would just answer these things with an open mind and sort of with a earnest curiosity. I had times where I felt okay as a woman, and that doesn't mean that I became an unhappy trans man. And thinking about those moments was actually very important towards being a happy man. So what do I mean? So times where I felt very comfortable and happy as a woman were when it allowed people to realize the kinds of experiences I had as someone that was doing STEM. The fact that I spent a lot of time being female really shaped my experience. It made me think about how men sometimes cut women off. It made me aware of how people put too much weight on appearance in professional settings. It made me someone where I had to be extra confident being someone that was perceived as female in a male-dominated space. And so in that sense, I related to people viewing me as a woman because those experiences were really salient. And now, as a man, I'm aware that that can still be important, and I can still relate to that, and that's part of the reason why I like doing sort of outreach stuff and connecting with other LGBT people, is because it's not just having been born female that can make you feel out of place in a male-dominated space. Many other LGBT people have had moments of feeling disconnected. And so, again, for yourself, it might be things like maybe you really like certain activities that are coded as a certain gender, and you can think, hey, can I preserve that if I transition? And similarly, like, there were moments where I felt uncomfortable with the idea of myself as a man, and reflecting on what those were useful in becoming a happy man in the end. Okay, step 8, the final step, the biggest step, is to try to find moments of quiet and normalcy where you're living as the gender you think you might transition towards. You've spent a lot of time thinking about the future now, right? Thinking about what aspects of gender experience resonate the most with you, thinking about what things make you feel comfortable, and what you're excited about going forward. Now try some of that out, right? What kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the kind of guy that goes to gay clubs? Do you want to be an outdoorsy fishing guy? Do you want to have a quiet night at home with your girlfriend? What do you think life is going to be like? And try that. And how does it feel? So I remember, for me, I was quarantining leading up to when I started testosterone, and I was quarantining with my ex and one other guy in our apartment. And they always called me he, and they always called me Arthur, and we had some nights of just watching TV. We'd watch Queer as Folk, which is a show about gay guys. We'd eat takeout, and I just was like, this is good, this is right. And it wasn't some grand moment of gender, it was that sort of quiet, that quiet moment, that day-to-day comfort that made me feel confident that I would be happy as a man. And so you have to try out what you think is going to work for you, and try to find those moments of peace. That's where, if you're someone, again, that struggles with anxiety, which I suspect you are if you're watching this video, and if you've watched several of these videos before, when you're feeling anxious, that's not when you're going to make a good choice. It's those moments when the anxiety takes a backseat, and when the life you're living is in the forefront, that you can think about, like, are you on the right path? Are you happy? And so you have to wait for that. You have to wait for those moments of quiet before you're really going to know. So we're wrapping up, right? Those are all the steps I have. And there's not one sort of magic moment where I'm like, okay, well, if you scored a 7 out of 10, then you're trans, and if you scored a 6, then you're non-binary, and then if you scored a 5 or below, like, you're cisgender. No, right? This is all internal. This is all what speaks to you, what resonates with you. There's not some sort of magic answer, right? And it might take months, but eventually you're going to get to a place where you feel confident in the choice that you're about to make, the big life choice that hopefully will work, but that you can't know until you've done it. And so that's the best you can ask for, right? With any major life choice. You can't ask for 100% confidence. You could have been the most masculine or feminine little 5-year-old, and that will not guarantee that you're going to be a happy trans person. And you can sit reflecting on these 8 things that I've told you for years, and that cannot guarantee that you're going to be a happy trans person. You can just take the time appropriate to think and reflect, and to make the best choice that you can given the information that you have. And then you make that choice. And it's a leap of faith, right? So you don't want to take a totally blind leap of faith, but there's got to be some hope here too. All I can tell you is that if you're someone who's questioning your gender, something's going to change in your life. It might be that you're going to transition, and it might be that you're going to work out other things that are going to make you happy and confident and excited about your future. But it's going to work out. You're going to have a life that's going to be thrilling, and a life that's going to be better than where you are right now. And that's what I wanted to hear, I think, when I would watch these videos. I was always hopeful that they would magically convince me that I was trans, because I just wanted life to get better. It wasn't that I wanted to be trans. I was kind of unhappy with the fact I was trans, but I knew something had to get better.